There are many stories from wartime which are, quite frankly, fascinating. Some stories demonstrate bravery in the fiercest odds. Others show humility in the bleakest times. And today's story is the story of that one time a submarine was apparently sunk by potatoes. Let's talk about it. Hello! Welcome to Brainspill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and before we get into this potato-based saga, we've got a little bit of a history lesson to go down first. In spring 1943, the US Navy was at war with the Japanese Empire, going through a grueling island-hopping campaign and cutting their way through vast swathes of land that Japan had conquered following the Pearl Harbor attack previously. The ship that we are following today is known as the USS O'Bannon, an American destroyer that had sailed the seas for much of the Second World War. This ship is so infamous not only for the fact that it had a service career of almost 30 years, but is one of the US Navy's most decorated destroyers. Back in the ship's early days, however, particularly during action in the Second World War, the destroyer was returning to the New Georgia area from the Solomons on the 5th of April 1943. Upon the ship's return, the O'Bannon picked up radio contacts that turned out to be a large Japanese submarine cruising on the surface, and, apparently, unaware of the ship's presence. Curious, you'd think that as a submarine, your job is the one to be sneaking up on your targets. But in this case, it seemed that the boot was on the other foot. The sub had no idea the American destroyer was there, and they were about to be in for a nasty surprise. But, however this even happened, they realised that the sub that they had their sights locked on, the lookouts on the sub were probably asleep, because nobody alerted anybody to the fact that the destroyer was even there. You would have imagined that being spotted by a destroyer like this would have made that submarine dip faster than you can say the word potato. Now, I could explain the whole saga to you in some potato-based way, but I don't think anybody puts it any better than the man that was there himself. This is the first-hand account of a radio man at the time called Ernest A. Herr, who said the following. "We approached rapidly and were preparing to ram the sub. Our captain and other officers on the bridge were trying to identify the type of sub and decided, at the last minute, that it could be a mine layer. Not wanting to blow up ourselves along with the sub, the decision was made that ramming was not a wise move. At the last moment, the rudder was swung hard to avoid a collision, and we found ourselves in a rather embarrassing situation as we sailed alongside of the Japanese submarine." Well, that's one way to get the job done, and who knows, if they carried on course, this story might have ended very differently, and perhaps maybe didn't even have a potato involved. And everybody knows that if your story doesn't have a potato in it, then clearly it's not a very good story. He then explained that on board the sub, they woke the Japanese, who only just realised what on earth was actually happening. The US ship, however, as a result of the last-minute decision not to ram the sub, was far too close to lower the guns and blast the sub. In addition, the US Navymen who boarded the sub were weaponless, in the least American thing to happen ever. The Japanese were in a similar boat, or sub in this case, in that they also weren't armed. This resulted in what I can only imagine would be one of the most awkward exchanges between two fighting fronts there's ever been. Yeah, you just kind of awkwardly stare at each other for a little bit, not really knowing what to do, but after some time the Japanese kind of got their act together because they realised that they had a deck gun which they could use to shoot those pesky Yanks off it. So they got to work. The submarine was equipped with a 3-inch deck gun, and the sub's captain finally decided that now was probably a good time to make use of it. As the Japanese sailors ran towards their gun, our deck parties reached into storage bins that were located nearby, picked out some potatoes, and threw them at the sailors on the deck of the sub. A potato battle ensued. Yeah, you'd imagine that a deck gun would make quick work of any uninvited guests, but apparently the potatoes were quite effective, mainly due to the fact that, at the time, it was probably more likely that these were live grenades than they were potatoes. I mean, you don't really expect your enemy to be throwing potatoes at you now, do you? Yes, whilst it can't be fully proven what exactly happened, or maybe if the Japanese are just afraid of potatoes, it is the grenade theory that makes this more believable. This kept the Japanese at bay and preoccupied them from not using that deck gun to shoot everybody down. This gave the O'Bannon a little bit of time to draw away and make some distance before it decides to use its big old guns to shoot at the submarine. So they were finally far enough away and they decided, this is the time, pull that trigger and let's see what happens. So firing commenced. One of the ship's shells managed to hit the sub's conning tower, but the sub managed to submerge away. Dang, so close, yet so far. But thankfully that wasn't the end, because they would soon get intel to find out that this actually caused quite a bit of damage. So much so that the submarine would sink as a result of this engagement, meaning that it wasn't a complete waste. They'd managed to catch them off guard, do some damage, which ultimately was the end of the submarine. So yes, whilst it wasn't the potatoes itself which actually sank the sub, this was helpful because it buyed them some time to make sure that they could use the actual guns to take this thing down. It was at this time that the ship was able to pass directly over the sub for a depth charge attack, ending it completely. At the very least, the potatoes served their purpose and gave them sufficient time to not only get a safe distance away from the submarine and also prevent them from using the deck gun, but cause damage to the sub itself. When the Association of Potato Growers of Maine heard about this strange episode, they had a plaque commissioned to commemorate the event. The plaque was mounted near the crew's mess hall as tribute to their heroic actions during the conflict. The plaque read as follows: "A tribute to the officers and men of the USS O'Bannon for their ingenuity in using our now proud potato to sink a Jap submarine in the spring of 1943. Presented by potato growers of the state of Maine, June 14th, 1945. And yeah, at the time this made pretty big local news. People in the press managed to get hold of this story and make a record of exactly what happened on this potato-based fiasco. This all sounds pretty epic and makes a great story. However, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you the full story. And the full story is that everything might not be what it seems. This incident may not have even happened, as per the following. Yes, sorry to burst your bubble, folks. The O'Bannon's commanding officer, Donald MacDonald, gave a rather different account a few years later, saying that no potatoes were actually ever used during the conflict, with only a reference to a potato being made as an offhand comment from one of the cooks on the O'Bannon, saying that the Japanese submarine was so close he could throw a potato at it. Yes, quite disappointing if you were to believe his record of events, and basically due to the fact that this whole event apparently never even happened. Nevertheless, this story is still pretty epic, and for it to be associated with one of the most infamous ships in the US Navy, it's got a pretty special place in many people's hearts, including mine, because man loves a good potato. If you like the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. As far as commemorative plaques go, this one must be up there. I don't think I've seen any plaque that says anything quite as cool as what is on this one. I mean, if you can pretty much sink a sub with a potato, that's pretty impressive. Pretty OP, but pretty impressive. I would just love years later for people to walk into this mess hall, see this plaque and not know the context behind the story, with people just scratching their heads trying to wonder how on earth you sink a submarine with a potato. And well, for those people that don't know how to Google things, I guess they'll never know. But if they maybe come across this channel after finding that plaque and then you find out what this is all about, that's a pretty cool story too. So there we are. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.